You're listening to Grain of Salt, a podcast hosted by Donnie Burtless and Christa and Donnie, covering the Buffalo Niagara region's food and drink scene. Today's episode features Christa and Donnie in a conversation with Andrew Galarneau, the food editor and restaurant critic for the Buffalo News.
All right, so today we're here on the Grain of Salt podcast with myself, Christa and Donnie, obviously, and Donnie Burtless, who is my partner in crime here.
Yes.
Say hi, Donnie.
Hi. Taking a back seat today.
So you say now. We'll see how that pans out. As well as Andrew Galarneau, who is the food editor and restaurant critic at the Buffalo News. Say hi, Andrew.
I'm glad to be here.
He's lying.
And it's Galarneau.
Did I say it wrong?
You said Galarneau.
I always say Galarneau. It's
Okay.
Galarneau?
Well, from now on, Galarneau.
Well, see, I will respect that.
Just
because
pretend there's an O on the end. It's easier.
Now everyone knows.
Well, right. Like, nobody ever knows how to say my last name, so I understand that.
I don't really care. I'm just busting your chops.
I know you are. All right. So we are here today to talk about a variety of things, but I'm sure that the biggest focus is really talking about restaurant criticism. Andrew does a lot of things as the food editor at the Buffalo News, and if you go to buffaloeats.org, you can find a podcast. I believe it's number 69.
Yeah.
I'm in fifth grade again. Number 69, and you can hear Andrew talk sort of about what his weekly regimen is, all of the things that he does at the news. And I think that podcast is about 2 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do a lot of things at the Buffalo News. Restaurant reviewing is the only part of my job anybody wants to talk about. I've made peace with that.
Well, that's good because, the public decides what they want to know, I understand that to some extent. I should clarify for anybody who doesn't know that I'm also a food editor at Buffalo Spree, but I don't actually conduct restaurant reviews. In fact, in all of my career, I would say that I have only conducted one real restaurant review, and that's mostly because I know too many people know me.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that a little bit, how hard it is to be anonymous in today's world, particularly in a city that has maybe 2 degrees of separation. But what I'd really like to dive into first is sort of the ratings, how you rate a restaurant. And I think this is something that I had thought you guys might get into on the Buffalo Eats podcast that we didn't spend a lot of time talking about. It is something that people want to talk to me about all of the time. Both in regards to the Buffalo News and just in general. We often know that when a rating is published and it's positive, a restaurant will simply pull that rating out of a whole 500 to 800 word review and simply use that rating as part of their media and promotions. So ratings have a great level of importance to restaurants, probably more so than a lot of the content that's actually in the review, which is arguable for sure. But so I want to talk a little bit about ratings. And the LA Times dropped their rating system in 2012, stating that star ratings are increasingly difficult to align with the reality of dining in Southern California, where your dinner choices might include a food truck, a neighborhood ethnic restaurant, a one-time only pop-up run by a famous chef, and a palace of fine dining.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about how hard it is to apply the same sort of rating system to restaurants that really run the gamut, and also to look at sort of how you determine ratings, what sort of analytics you use to come up with that final number. Andrew?
Well, the hardest part, the hardest thing to justify about the rating system is the fact that ratings, the bottom line is ratings come from my gut. It's my personal reaction to what that meal was like. How do I feel walking out? We have a system of plates, which system might not be the right word. Basically, I'm supposed to hand out between 5 and 10 plates. I'm not really supposed to go below that based on the theory that if you're going to appear in the Buffalo News, that is in and of itself a recommendation. There is a set of restaurants of amorphous scope that we're never going to review because they're not good enough. They're just not good enough to bring to our readers' attention. So
Okay.
my operational range at this point is from 5 to 10. So when I walk out after everything, carefully considered meal, how am I feeling? Now, that's frustrating for readers because it makes it extraordinarily difficult to compare across genres. But as I have taken pains to state numerous times in my reviews, the rating needs to be considered as a measurement of how did this restaurant do to carry out its mission. Mm-hmm. To make meaningful use of that, you have to have some inkling of what the mission is. Korea House, the Korean barbecue place on Evans Road, has a different mission than Ocean does in downtown Buffalo. They're not trying to do the same thing. So to try to apply ratings across those divisions is an exercise in frustration for readers. And I'm sorry that they do that. But I try to be as plain as I can.
Yeah.
Now, would I prefer to have a different system? Yes, I would. Am I jealous of Jonathan Gold? Yes, I am. And there's nothing I can do about it. I need to offer ratings, and if you want to understand, how the heck could Galarneau give Polish Villa 2 a 9?
This was coming to my next question. You predicted it.
Have to read the review. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it will make no sense at all. I'm not saying if you read the review, you will necessarily agree with me, but it will make no sense unless you understand the justification which is laid out in the review.
And do you have a system where you keep track of all of the restaurants you've reviewed in, for example, a spreadsheet with how many plates you've given them, which for anybody who's listening, plates translate to stars in your traditional review. And then go back, and when you say, like, oh, I'm going to give Polish Villa 9 stars, you look at all the other places that you've given 8 or 9 or 10 stars and evaluated where they fall within that range? Or is it really that gut instinct you were talking about?
To answer your questions, one, I do keep a spreadsheet. I do keep track of everything. I do not consult it when I am trying to decide how many plates. Is a place a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? That is walking out, how am I feeling? Maybe there's a better way to do it, but I'm just telling you, that's how I do it.
No, I'd rather have you tell me how you do it than how you think it should be done whatever.
The Buffalo News Restaurant Review is its own distinct animal. It is the product of one person who's got opinions, that person being me. It is not to be compared, for instance, with the New York Times restaurant rating system, which is a different animal entirely.
Sure it is.
That's the product of people who do nothing but go to restaurants and think about trying ways to explain what they're really like. These are people who can keep going back to a restaurant until they are satisfied that they have nailed it. They have to go at least 3 times at different times of the week, at different times of the day. That is a whole nother animal. I loved Pete Wells' review of the really super expensive Japanese place that he pretty much demolished. I loved reading that. I noted that he went back at least 4 times over the course of a year.
Right.
Before he produced that piece of writing for people to enjoy. That makes me jealous as heck. But hey, that's a different animal. I'm a guy driving a VW and somebody just zoomed by me in the the Maserati. Hey, I'm doing what I can to try to deliver actionable intelligence to my readers the best way I can, and it's a work in progress. I'm working on it.
I don't know that any mid-sized paper in the United States currently has a budget set where its critic can eat out more than once before delivering a review when reviews are done on a weekly basis. But I wonder, do you desire to buck the system at all? Does the system frustrate you? Do you wish that you could somehow bring change to the system, or are you resigned to it?
Well, which part of the system are you talking about?
Well, the system that enforces that you can only go to a restaurant one time and that you have to use that rating method.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if there was some way where I had the time and money to keep going back to a fine restaurant until I felt like I had really nailed it, absolutely I would be in favor of such a thing. But at this point, the readers of the Buffalo News have a choice between a restaurant review that is quite often usually based on a single visit, and no restaurant review. So.
Right. Okay. So in talking about reviewing, you mentioned the mission of a restaurant and trying to understand the mission of a restaurant. And an interesting thing is that Ruth Reichel, who we all know, and who I'm sure many of our listeners know, she's written a number of really great books and is a well-regarded former restaurant critic for the New York Times and LA Times and was the editor for Gourmet Magazine or whatever. She recently said that she feels a critic's job is to judge a restaurant based on what they're trying to do and how well they do that. She studies up on the chef, tries to figure out what their previous cooking gigs were, and really reads whatever statements they've put out about what they are trying to do so she can judge them based on their own pretensions. She feels that one of the biggest faults of criticism is that critics have a tendency to judge a restaurant on what they wish it would be rather than what it is trying to be, and that that's a big mistake. Is that sort of what you're saying as well?
Yes, that's what I do. I try to read everything there is available about what a chef's mission is, how they view the restaurant. I ask them.
After you've eaten there, when you're doing the phone interview. So people should know that, because you and I know this, and probably every chef in town does, but when you do a review for fact-checking purposes, et cetera, you call the restaurant afterward.
And I definitely call them afterward. We have to arrange photography. And often I have a conversation with the chef, not every single time, but quite often about what they're trying to do, about specific dishes, partly to fact-check my reporting. I mean, I feel like the restaurant review that Andrew Galarneau does is a reporting job. It's what was it like?
Which you did for 25 years prior to becoming a food restaurant critic.
I come at restaurant reviewing from a reporter's standpoint. Right. My feeling is that a good reporter, whatever their professional background, ought to be able to deliver the essence of what an event was like. And every dinner ought to be an event, even if it's chicken wings and beef on weck. It ought to be an event. You ought to go to a place, assess the environment. You have choices to make. You have interactions with other people. You do a basic, fundamental human thing. You're being fed, you know. But you can. I feel like you can get nutrition in a number of different levels from a good restaurant meal, and that's what I'm trying to be sensitive to, and just tell people. Look, here's what it was like. Here's when I ordered this. I got that. And just tell them what it was like. The opinion part, did I like it? How did it compare to other things that I've had like this? Is I feel like the last third of what I do. I try to create a setting where you can get information and use it, even if you don't agree with my opinion.
I see. So you want to give people the lay of the land with a soupçon of opinion at the end that they can take or not take.
Yeah, and the opinion is important. The opinion isn't necessary. I feel like somebody needs to go into places and not only give people the lay of the land dispassionately, but also call balls and strikes. That hit, that missed. That was sort of painting the corner, if you will. And my opinion is only my opinion. My reaction is my reaction. But my hope is that over a period of time, people can calibrate themselves a little bit to where my taste is and get a good sense of, like, if something really blew my doors off, they're probably going to like it.
Right. So, and we'll get to that in a minute when we talk about crowdsourced reviews. Is sort of, that's one of the benefits that a lot of people say to having a professional food critic and using professional food critiques as a way to determine where you're going to eat when you travel, rather than crowdsourced reviews, because you can know and trust and respect that critic as opposed to trying to find somebody on Yelp that you know or trust or respect. But we'll get to that in a minute. I want to talk a little bit more, and Donnie, maybe you'll have some things to say about this. Do you have any estimate of how many restaurant reviews you've done in the last since 2009?
Judging by, like, we post all of our blog posts to Urban Spoon. That kind of helps us keep track of the cities we've been in and everything. In Buffalo, we've posted articles about 500 restaurants, 502.
And Andrew, you've been doing this 2.5, 3 years.
It'll be 3 years in March.
Okay, so 3 years, and you're weekly for the most part with the restaurant reviews.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I will say some of our posts are way shorter than
Sure.
so like some restaurants will devote 1,000 words to, and some it's a 200-word blurb because that's kind of what it deserves.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about what a critic's sort of main role is. And I want to start that conversation by using a quote from the Pulitzer Prize and James Beard Award winner, who you mentioned earlier, Jonathan Gold. He says, the greatest tool in a toolbox is, as a critic of anything, your job is basically, at least on a world historical scale, to know more about the restaurants you're going to than even the people who are in the restaurants. That you know why they're doing the things that they're doing, even if not specifically, you know why on a historical scale they're doing the things they're doing. You have dishes, you taste dishes with the allusions to things, and you know that what they're alluding to. You're coming across a dish like a standard from New Nordic cooking, and your job is to know what that is. In the day of the internet, it's even more important because, for example, he said there was a restaurant review that was glowing in Gourmet that he read, and he could tell that like half of the dishes had been borrowed from a restaurant across the globe that he had written about at one point. And he's saying that, if Google really facilitates the ability to know more about what's happening in the world than certainly restaurant critics used to know, and that can be overwhelming to some extent. But I guess if you're looking at the main role of a critic, be they an art critic or a film critic or a restaurant critic, sort of what do you feel that role should be, whether or not that's what you're capable of doing in the environs of Buffalo or within the restraints of your hours that you're given to work at the news. Andrew, do you have general opinions about sort of what a critic's role is?
Well, I would love for my role to be what Jonathan Gold does.
Yes. I think that's the second time you said that.
He's got a lot of time to research, and he's got 25 years or more of real serious restaurant criticism. I only really started being a restaurant critic, seriously, not even 3 years ago. I agree to a certain extent in that I try to bring context to evaluating a dish and telling people what it's like. If there are allusions being made, if something is an advanced version of a prior dish, I'd like to be able to give that enlightenment. That's not always something I'm able to do. I mean, I feel like my core function is telling people what was it like and giving them clues to would I like it? I mean, if I feel I can nail that fundamentally, then I feel like I've done my core job. Sometimes I can add more. Sometimes I know more about a chef, about a cuisine. Sometimes I've seen things evolve, and I can hip people to that. Sometimes I recently wrote about 80 China Cafe. I was able to write a couple paragraphs to try to put that largely authentic Chinese restaurant in a constellation around where does it compare to the other 4 authentic Chinese places in Amherst. Right. That's, to me, my first thrust is not as any sort of educator, but as a consumer advocate. Mm-hmm. What did I think about this? How did it compare to other things? All in the service of, is this a place I want to go and try? And if I go and try, what should I order?
Yeah. And so I should point out that I'm sort of in the exact opposite situation of you, where I do not have a background in journalism. My background is in food. And so for me, when I look at a restaurant, I'm looking at the historical context of the food that they're serving and also the historical context of what the restaurant means to the scene here in Buffalo, but also a lot of the very technical aspects of what's being delivered. Not just does it taste good, not just did it arrive on time or in hot and whatever.
Was it executed properly?
Right, and was the claim on the menu of what this dish is supposed to be actually what it really is, and was it made properly? Okay. How much of that sort of I don't want to insinuate that you don't know what you're talking about. That's not what I'm trying to insinuate. But as a person who doesn't have, and Donnie, I'm going to ask you this question too, an extensive food background, is that a challenging aspect of your job for you?
That is a challenge I'm happy to take up. I mean, if somebody says they're selling croque monsieurs, it's my job to know what a croque monsieur is and what it isn't, and how it should look and how it should feel. What is the glory moments of a croque monsieur? I should know all that if I'm going to write about a croque monsieur. And sure. I try to make sure that I do that with every dish that is a specific dish. It's not sort of an original composition that someone's doing, and so because you want to be able to tell people, how does this measure up against the history of croque monsieur.
And if you've never had a croque monsieur before, or you've never made one, how do you do that?
Hopefully I'm not in that position too often, but I go to the internet, frankly. If there's an ingredient, if I'm at Buffalo proper and there's an ingredient on the menu I have totally never heard of, what does anybody do? I Google that shit, because I want to know what it is and how it might be playing into the whole overall scheme of what's going on. When I started out, I was sometimes in the position where I was tasting dishes for the first time. That happens less and less often these days. I've had scungili, I've had potato foie gras so many different ways, and suck it, Californians. I've had most of the experiences now that I think overlap with the vast majority of what's available, at least in Buffalo, New York.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't had Matsuhisa level sushi with like live shrimp wriggling in my chopsticks. I haven't eaten the freshest scallops, in Venice. But I got most of it covered. I feel like, and whatever else you haven't actually tried, the internet. Listen, what I'm not going to do is try to blunder through and offer some opinion on some dish I've never had, because you're just going to expose yourself as a fool. The thing with today's food coverage is that, man, everybody's reading and they really care. Like, they really care. Like, 10 years ago, it was much more you were likely to get a letter correcting you on some factual point that you made in error, which I do sometimes, from a little old lady with a typewriter and some time on her hands. Now, boom, if you make a mistake, you hear about it like too sweet.
Oh, that comment section is a lovely place.
Everybody has got a cell phone and they feel like they should let you know. So hey, listen, it's you learn as you go along, but I'm really good about how my batting average is working out.
And so if you're in a situation where, for example, there's a technique being used that you've not ever experienced before, let's say it's the first time you're having a dish with foam on it, just to be random and somewhat outdated. I'm sure you have, because now it's sort of everywhere.
Yeah.
But 5 years ago, there weren't a lot of people doing foam. And so if you had a dish with foam on it and you'd never done that before, while you can Google up a lot of information about foam and you can objectively determine whether or not that sauce being foamed added to the dish or detracted from the dish, is very challenging to understand if the foam was made properly, right?
And when I run across a situation like that, I put in the review, I've never encountered this before. Here's what it was like for me. I feel like that has some value to it.
Some merit, right?
We're going through this together for the first time. And, did it work? Did it not work? Just because something is some buzzy gastronomic term that like every chef on the cover of New York Magazine is throwing around, doesn't mean that when somebody tries to do it in Buffalo, it's going to taste good.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
That's why I wonder, like, as a person with a food background, being able to determine whether something's been done technically well, in addition to whether or not it tastes good, is really important to me.
Well, yeah. I would throw out that, and not to beat my drum too much, but I was a pretty proficient home cook.
Sure, you were. Absolutely.
And I'm not going to say that I would pull off a croquembouche at home, but I've done enough and worked through enough so that I'm very aware of most of the major techniques and why you're supposed to do things the way you're supposed to do them.
Okay.
What it takes to get something to come out right that's crispy on the outside and melty on the inside like it's supposed to be. That is I know how hard it is, and I know what a small miracle it is when you get a plate that lands on your table at a restaurant and everything, all of these technical fine points that have to be nailed or it won't reach the peak of its possibility as a dish. When a dish like that lands in front of me, I feel like I can understand it for the miracle that it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Donnie, is that sort of your take on things?
I guess was fortunate in that I built basically Buffalo Eats from the ground up, and I didn't have the pressure of an audience right away.
Sure.
And my whole background going into it was kind of actually neither of yours. I didn't have a food background, and I didn't have a reporting or journalism background. So it was me trying to write my own rules at first, and I think a lot of people saw through the fact that I was trying to critique foods that I had just tried for the first time.
Sure.
And it was I was naive. I didn't really think like I was going to have a big lesson in, and the comments started coming in, and I remember going to a pizza place once, and Alan Bedenko left me a good 500-word comment.
Well, Alan and pizza. You don't want to get in between Alan and pizza.
No, but it was one of those things that kind of woke me up that me and my wife around, our second year kind of sat back and were like people are actually reading this, and we have to have some integrity, and we should be doing a better job of figuring out what we're eating and what's going into it, and have an informed opinion. Because, initially we were just going places and saying what we ate. We weren't trying to be that, I don't know. We didn't think we were authoritative enough to have an opinion.
Sure.
And, this February is our 6th anniversary. And, traveling around the world and eating in different cities, we've developed a palate and a knowledge of food that... And now if I'm writing a review or anything, I feel way more confident in giving my opinion of what I'm having because I have this palate that I've built over the last 6 years.
You've put in your 10,000
kind of
hours? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I've essentially put in my 10,000 hours, and it took a while. I think people liked us at first because we weren't experts, because we came from an angle where I was a chicken wing eater or chicken finger eater.
Yes, as
I
tease you about regularly.
Yeah, and that I didn't eat anything until I turned basically 25. And the idea of the blog was, I'm not an expert, but if I can eat this and I can tell you I liked it, like, you should be able to like it. It was more of a trying to get people to open up to new experiences.
Sure, which is what had happened to you.
Yeah,
right.
and I think that was maybe our message in the first couple of years, but I think we've gotten away from that in the last 3 at least.
Sure.
It's weird. You asked me 10 years ago if I'd be a guy who's known for writing food.
You would have laughed.
Yeah, I would have laughed because I didn't even eat grilled cheese. I don't know what. So I don't think I have a huge, as much of a credibility as maybe the two of you. Definitely I don't. But I think we've built our own rules, and I think people come to our site because they're looking for, I don't want to say everyman, but they're looking for the average guy who if he's not a huge foodie, but he's starting to get into it, where are the places that are exciting
I
him?
think I have to say that I definitely agree with you on that point in your first few years, but that is so not the case today, Donnie, and you are misleading yourself to believe that anybody comes to you for anything but the honest truth and an educated, opinionated skew or take on something. Yeah. It definitely used to be the case that it was here's what I ate.
Yeah.
It was cool.
I
I'd
sushi.
come back here again.
Sushi's pretty neat.
We had fries, but it's certainly not that way anymore. And I know that even a lot of restaurant people rely on your blog for very honest assessments of what's happening in the scene. And so speaking about that, I'm kind of wondering since both of you do generate what would be called in sometimes negative or actually critical reviews, being honest about sort of the things that could do better. And I think that both of you feel that your roles are as consumer advocates, which Andrew talked about earlier. How do you feel personally or professionally about the impact what you do has on the actual restaurant that you're reviewing? As when you review a novel or a film, unless you're one of the major heavy hitters in this country, you're probably not going to have a big impact on how many people buy the book or how many people go to the film. Yeah. When you're an art reviewer, same thing. But when you are a restaurant reviewer, you definitely have some sort of impact on whether people flock to that place on Friday night after, the Gusto came out on Thursday, or whether or not people don't go there ever. And so I'm just sort of wondering how you feel about that.
Well, it's a responsibility that I take seriously. At the same time, reminding myself and my readers that I write for my readers. I don't write for restaurant owners. As much as I respect them, as much as I admire them, as much as I just want to take them home and tuck them in, as happy as I am to be an eating citizen in a city that has people of such unbelievable talent and passion and endurance. I don't work for them. Mm-hmm. I want them to do great. I want everything they do to be 100% marvelous, and I want it to kill. And I want it to be around forever and make me happy so that I can live in such a town with such places I can take people to. But in the end, I work for the reader, and the reader deserves and expects somebody to call balls and strikes, somebody to say, this worked, this didn't work, for me, right? And to be able to extrapolate from that, and at the same time give them a sense of how did the overall operation work. Is this going to be a place where you're like, wow, I wish she would stop talking with her friends and come over here and ask me what I want to drink? Or is it the kind of place where you want for nothing? Mm-hmm. So I guess to sum up, I take the impact that I might have on a restaurant very, very seriously. I do not take what I feel are cheap shots. One of the things that very rarely you would ever see in my review are things like, how many fruit flies did I see buzzing around?
Right.
You know, I understand that fruit flies are a part of restaurants, and especially under certain circumstances, especially during the summer, things like that, you're going to see some flies. So I don't want to subject... I know enough about the restaurant business to know that there are a whole bunch of things that you could talk about that are just cheap, and you shouldn't bring them up when you're reviewing restaurants for a mass audience.
You're saying cheap shots, like things that you could make really funny or really stingy, but aren't necessarily.
I never put the meanest thing that somebody said at the table in the review. That's a rule I have. I have a position.
I would love a list of those things.
And I can't do that here, but we'll talk about that later. You know, if somebody is going to offer criticism in my review, whether it's me or somebody who I bring forward to offer a quote, because it's pretty funny, I'm not going to let them take a cheap shot, you know, because that's not... I believe that in the end, even though I serve the readers and I'm there to try to do my best to tell the truth, that what restaurateurs do deserves the utmost respect. Restaurants are a daily miracle. And anyone who writes about them in any critical sense needs to understand that. The fact that they're all open each day and serving food to the public is the confluence of so many things, hard work and passion and dedication and all that stuff. So when I write my review, I try to keep all of that in mind.
Yeah. And Donnie?
You know, I kind of, I guess... Going back, I was naive at first. I thought that, you know, the couple hundred people reading it were family and friends. And it wasn't until I started to receive feedback from restaurant owners, either via email or threatening phone calls, that I realized that if I said anything negative, this is actually getting back to the people who are doing it. And I'd like to say that we're pretty proud that we feel that the people who have trusted, or the people who have generously gone to our website and have become fans or followers and everything, that we owe them something, that they've decided to spend their time reading what we put out and supporting us. And those are the people that I want to be honest with. I would never want to go easy on somebody because I was afraid it would hurt their feelings. But yeah, I mean, we try to be as honest as possible. And I know Andrew does a really good job of not, I think you know most of the chefs in the city, but you're not like pals with them. You're not hanging out and drinking. I've kind of fell into that world a little bit, and it's made things more difficult for sure. I guess we're still always finding that fine line of being constructive criticism, and realizing that I hope the people that we associate ourselves with know that everything we do is in the best interest and that we're just trying to be honest.
Well, and so that leads me to a question that actually a chef I was talking to the other day had said that he would ask if he was sitting here at our meeting today. And that question is, you know, do you expect at any point the negative criticism that you do put out there to be taken seriously by the restaurants, to be listened to or examined?
If I'm criticizing a dish in a restaurant review, it's not because I'm like trying to send a bulletin to the chef. Mm-hmm. It's me explaining to my readers why something either worked or didn't work for me. I'm not in the message sending business. I work for the readers, and I'm not trying to wig-wag by semaphore any sort of, well, chef, I think you should change your direction to this or that or the other thing. Listen, that's their business, you know? Maybe everybody else who ate the dish that I criticized loved the hell out of it, in which case I wouldn't expect them to change a damn thing. Mm-hmm. And why would they?
There's a lot of restaurants that won't change you.
Listen, I want to be a guide and a scout for readers. I do not view myself as being in any sort of prescriptive position over the people who have dedicated their lives to preparing food and somehow, against the odds, making it available in a commercial setting in Buffalo, New York. I mean, if they want to take some clues or direction, such as they see fit from something that I've written, that's great. But that's not what I'm trying to do. You know, somebody asked me like a year and a half ago, I guess it was now, what do you feel your influence should be on the scene? Mm-hmm. I'm like, I was totally flabbergasted. I had never thought of myself that way. I'm like, my influence on the scene.
How could you not think yourself that way?
Like I'm a guy in tails, like waving a conductor batons.
No, but you're seriously living in a vacuum if you think that you don't have an influence on the scene.
I'm telling you, this is not my intent.
Okay,
true, but I mean, you are the proponent of all proponents of authentic Chinese food. And the fact that you gave so much press to Peking Quick One in its early days, the fact that we have 5 restaurants now that are specializing in
authentic Chinese fare,
I would say that your review that it brought the non-Asian UB students to these restaurants have clearly had an impact.
100%.
Well, that's very kind of you. I would point out that probably the 3,000 to 5,000 Chinese nationals living in and around the campus at Amherst, New York, probably had more to do with. No,
I'm sorry, you're wrong, because they've lived there all this time. That's not new.
Well,
I think you've introduced people who
hasn't
aren't
the Chinese enrollment at UB been growing?
It has, but it's really not. That's not a fair assessment, Andrew. Oh. Because if that was the case, wouldn't we have better Italian food? I mean, we have hundreds of Italians, thousands, millions of Italians living here, and we have like 3 really good Italian restaurants, and all the rest of them are terrible.
If you really want to go down that road, let me ask you the question: how come with the fact that the Greeks are a dominant sector of the Buffalo, New York restaurant market, how come there's no good high-end Greek restaurant in town?
I think that my honest opinion is because I think that if you look, Acropolis would like to think that they're offering some of that. Just saying. And I think that if you understand the history of how the Greek diner movement happened and moved across New York State and ended up here in Buffalo, and how that whole thing parlayed into the sort of Greek diner takeover that exists still today, I think it's understandable why that has remained in place. I think that the people who run those restaurants believe that the Buffalo dining crowd would not understand or care for the finer and more authentic foods that are available in Greece, which is exactly the scenario we had with Mexican food until very recently, and exactly the same scenario we had with 1,000 other sort of ethnic cuisines, is that the white American 1970s version was available in such quantity here that people just assume that there's no desire for anything else.
I'd also say that pretty much a majority of the Greek restaurants that are run in Buffalo are run by people who aren't Greek.
Well, that's true too.
Most of them are Lebanese that I know.
Andrew's making silly faces. That's why we're laughing. So, your follow-up, Andrew? You were wanting to say something, and then Donnie interjected.
I was just to say that what the Greek restaurateurs that I know that I have posited this question to have said exactly the same thing.
Right.
There's no market for it. It won't sell.
Well, that's their perception. And that was the same perception that people had after years of Mighty Taco and Grandma Mora's of Mexican food in Western New York. And yet it took 5 years of people publishing on every piece of platform available in the area that all anybody really wanted here was authentic Mexican cuisine. And we're still limping along in that department, but it's certainly there are more options available.
Well, I think it's terrific that you think I have influence. So let's do everything we can to pump that up and make it seem like that's a real fact. Yeah. But there's only so many Greek restaurateurs I can take by the shoulders and shake and say, like, maybe you're wrong, maybe it will sell. That doesn't open a restaurant.
Well, but the truth is that some of what drives desire and change here is the infiltration of new people who have had experiences elsewhere. And the truth is that only in major cities in Western New York or in the United States do you find an upper level of Greek food. What we have here is pretty typical, and it's that whole diner side of souvlaki thing.
You're lucky to find a lamb shank.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though, is I think that that's the case in pretty much anywhere but big cities, and that it would require a large number of people moving here from a big city to say, this is what we want.
Yeah.
You know? But sometimes it's magical. For example, if you look at the the public airing of the desire for Ethiopian food, which happened over the course of a couple years. Newell at BuffaloRising.com, must have published a story every 2 months for a year and a half about how much he wanted an Ethiopian restaurant to come here. And he was courting a gentleman who runs an Ethiopian restaurant in St. Catharines and bringing him down here and trying to get him to purchase a place. And because of the number of African immigrants who are similarly moving in to the area and being directed by the International Institute of Buffalo and other Journey's End, other organizations, we managed to come up with a handful of immigrants who wanted to run Ethiopian restaurants, and now we have sort of way more of them than maybe we need.
That was definitely the hot thing for several years. It was the number one thing everyone would bring up is we want an Ethiopian
right. So
restaurant.
it's that confluence again, that sort of magical scenario where everything somehow manages to work together. And I think that there's some requirement of desire on the part of an entrepreneur, a public call for something. And in order for the public to get on board with that call, they have to understand and be able to identify what that cuisine is.
True.
I think if you talk to Abba Bia about why he opened up his restaurant, Lucy, at Amherst and Grant, I don't think he would tell you that he read about it in the newspaper and he decided to open a restaurant.
I don't.
His story's a little different.
I know. I agree. I'm just saying that I think that the reason why we have so many of them and not just one, and I mean,
okay, we've got Couture, we've got the West Side Bazaar, and then there's Thea's, which is run by the Medici House people in East Aurora.
Yes, and there was one also on Bailey, which is closed.
Yes.
I would say though, five from zero in a year.
In a year and a half is kind of a big number.
Yeah. Okay. For our size city.
Especially given the fact that, there are very few people here who I would suggest were even familiar with Ethiopian food.
And sorry, I thought we were talking about my influence here. Am I somehow responsible for that? I just want to talk about my influence more because it's making me pretty happy, I'll tell you what.
No, but I think it's very challenging as even from my position and what I do is it's hard for me to not think about the influence and impact of the work that I do or have done or will do. And that probably weighs on me more heavily than anything. And I think you both probably know that about me.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder how, if as a person who is not a restaurant critic in a public forum, I don't know how you jive, how hard, that would be so challenging for me.
You know what, I like to think that, like you said, like the chef, I'm assuming, that wanted to know if we are trying to directly influence something. I like to think that in the restaurants where people know what they're doing, they already know these issues. Like, we're just bringing to light things that they're probably already upset about, for the most part. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about service, if we're talking about execution of some dishes, I mean, I would like to think that if I go to a restaurant and I have horrible service, that restaurant has to know they have horrible service to a certain degree.
Interesting.
And so I some of the times I like to think that I'm bringing these things out to light into a bigger audience. Mm-hmm. That maybe in the house they're talking about these, like, oh God, she's a horrible server. Like, what do we have to do? And if I bring it to a thing like, yeah, there's some horrible servers at this restaurant, or the dishes come out cold, or things like that, I like to think more as I'm never going at it from like the chef's artistic sense of his menu or anything. I'm not. I don't feel extremely qualified to break down like this guy should have added this to a dish or something like that. Mm-hmm. But from an operational standpoint, if it's a place that is worth your money, I think if I'm making critiques on that level, in the good restaurants, they should know they already have those issues.
And so before we transition into talking about crowdsourced reviews and Yelp, I just want to briefly touch on, and this is a good way to transition that, on the idea of negative reviews. Certainly in big city papers, they're more likely to publish a review that's largely negative. We don't do that a lot in this community, and we sort of never have. Yeah. I could say very openly that Buffalo Spree's review policy is that if a place isn't better, that it is bad, that we will not give it column inches. And the top-down decision for that is that we only publish so many restaurant reviews a year, and they are valuable to our readers and valuable to the restaurants who are featured in them. And why would we give column inches to a restaurant to berate it when we could instead use those column inches to bolster someone that maybe people aren't aware of?
Yeah.
And so that's sort of that was the take when I got there. It's generally the take today. And Donnie, you have a tendency to be, while pleasant, quite honest about the experiences that you have in restaurants, and you don't really have anybody. I'm getting there, Andrew. You don't have anybody who's directing you and telling you what you can and can't say.
No, yeah,
other than your own conscious or decisions.
Yeah,
or
it's and it's tempting because I think the three of us could say that the reviews that generally get the most reaction
are the scathing ones.
Are the scathing ones or the
Amazing.
Excellent ones.
Right.
And that the ones that go in the middle kind of are in the middle. Like it's hard to really get excited about writing something that was average. I think there was a point where we maybe took the fact that we don't have anyone to answer to, that we don't have a minimum or a maximum, that if we had a really bad meal, we kind of enjoyed saying that we had a really bad meal. Or occasionally writing about a place that we thought was unfairly known as a great restaurant in the area.
When it's not.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot of those.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't want to say we're on like a crusade to try to like right the wrongs of public opinion about things. But we have no problem writing a negative review. But when we do those are the ones that me and my wife Allie scrutinize the most. Right. Because if I'm gonna rip apart a place, like I have to make sure that I can back it up with why I'm ripping it apart.
And Andrew, how do you feel about that?
About him ripping restaurants?
Well, or about yourself. I mean, you have definitely dealt some swift blows over the course of the last year, even if they are only a sentence long.
Well, look, as I've said from the beginning, the Buffalo News scale is specifically tilted so that we only wanted to bring you restaurants that we think are worth your time. So that leaves out the suffering sisters of the restaurant community that are going to close sometime soon anyways. Yeah. I'm not going to go in there. I'm not going to write about them. I'm not going to waste our time talking about them. When I go to restaurants, the job is to tell the truth. So if I got a dish I didn't like, I got to be honest about it. And I got to tell. But here's the thing: I feel like that puts it incumbent upon me to explain why specifically I didn't like it in terms that everyone who's reading it should be able to understand.
That's got to be like the number one critique from like restaurant owners is people who say, "Oh, I just didn't like it," and then give no feedback on why.
I don't feel like I can just get away with, and I wouldn't want to. I want to be able to explain. I want to be able to articulate my standards, such as they are, and how that particular dish deviated from the standards. That is my mission. If I can't do that, I should not criticize a dish. I will say that absolutely. If I can't tell you specifically what I thought was wrong and why it didn't meet my standards, make me happy, however you want to put it, then I shouldn't be doing it. And that has led to some pointed sentences for sure. But sometimes dishes suck. Sometimes they were a bad idea to begin with. Sometimes they were a good idea that wasn't performed well for whatever particular reason. And one of the things that I keep in mind is that I would rather, in the back of my mind, go into a restaurant and see where a chef is trying to do something distinctive, trying to do something original, and not really quite pulling it off so that it made me happy. I would rather see that than somebody who's trying to do the same old, doing a half-assed job of it, a moderately acceptable job. Mm-hmm. So what I'm telling you is I'm trying to keep in mind here that I don't want to try to I don't want to squelch somebody who tried something different for trying something different.
Right.
But if it worked, fabulous. We've got a new star is born. If it didn't work, well, you know what? Somebody's trying, and I got to give them credit for that, even if it didn't maybe really make me happy. I mean, does that answer your question?
It does. It generally does.
That's tricky. I mean, because you don't want to give people brownie points for trying.
I don't think.
No.
I might say somewhere down further in the review that this is a person. All right, let's talk about Brian McCosey, okay? Because Black Iron Bistro is a great example. I went in there. The furniture was weird. We got stuck on a weird table. I
will
back
also
problems,
back up the furniture.
And the dishes when they came out, they were really. It was clear this was somebody who's trying to do something distinctive, something different, not just the same old trying to make money out of selling people food. And you know what? I admire that. So what I did was to describe what I thought worked and didn't work about what I particularly had. And at the end of the review, said, "This guy's trying. Check him out." Some people might feel. I believe that got a 7. I'm trying to remember now. Some people might say, "Oh my God, it got a 7. That's not as good as X and Y and Z." And if you want to play that game, well, I guess there's no winning for me. But that's what was my experience. I walked out of there going like, "I can't wait to see what this guy's doing in a year."
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people.
And how much blowback do you get? I mean, I'm not going to ask you to name names.
That'll be when the microphones turn off.
I've only gotten a couple of screaming phone calls. And honestly, much less blowback than I had anticipated or anything anyone would expect.
Okay.
Whatever their feelings are after reviews, it has been my experience so far to date, January 18th, 2015, that chefs and owners are largely suffering in silence or counting their losses or whatever the hell is going on. Well, they don't get me into it.
I can't remember who said it, but there's a famous critic who said that the downside to being a restaurant critic is that all the chefs are nice to your face and hate you behind your back, and that nobody will ever tell you what they really think because they're terrified of the power that you have over them.
Well, it's not my intent to terrify. It's my intent to do my job. And if there has to be some distance there to let me do my job and for them to see me and not freak out or whatever, then maybe that's healthy for all of us.
Right.
That there's a little bit of distance. Would I rather be in James Roberts' backyard sucking mud bugs? Yes, I would.
Cheers.
It's a pretty good time.
But I'm a human being, and I take my role very seriously. And it's too hard for me to do that sort of thing, and also a palsy-walsy around with people.
And do you feel, so here we go, I want to talk about this briefly. Where are we at time-wise, Tom?
We're about 7 minutes away from 3:30.
Okay. So I'm wondering, with the a lot of restaurateur or chef or critics are not trying to be anonymous anymore. I mean, Adam Platt just this year famously unveiled himself on the cover of the magazine, and he says that that over the years anonymity has served a purpose, but that it was largely a myth. And that, in today's world, obviously, it's very easy to Google an image of somebody. And certainly, Andrew, you were making videos for the Buffalo News for many years.
They printed my picture about 100 times.
Before they turned you into a shadowed man wearing a cowboy hat for some reason on the cover of the paper. And so
it's a fedora.
Okay, well, it looks like a cowboy hat to me. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, so do you personally feel that it would be challenging to be good at your job and friends or at least acquaintances with people in the community who you criticize for a living, or do you feel that's would be a challenging scenario for anybody?
Well, I can only speak to my own condition, and my own condition is that I don't want to take free food and palsy-walsy around and listen to somebody's hearts and dreams and what they wanted a dish to be and how they, picked this ingredient next to their, grandmother's grave on the edge of a cemetery in the middle of summer so that they could present it to you in the middle of the winter and all the whole backstory to a dish. And then be able to deliver to my readers what I thought of the dish.
Yeah.
I love artists and I love the artistry of it. But I can't buy into the heart and soul of a chef and write objectively about his food. I mean, because, if you are desperately in love with a cook and they make you something.
You're looking at me.
That's yes, I am. If you're desperately in love with a cook, that stuff is going to taste better. And
you
other
really
people
think that?
Other people who absolutely. How does love not alter the taste of somebody who made you some eggs or something? You know. And here's the problem with that. It's okay to be in love, and it's okay to love somebody who you loves eggs. The problem is that my function is supposed to be delivering actionable intelligence to people who read my reviews in the Buffalo News. And if they never got a chance to fall in love with that chef the way I did, then they're going to come and they're going to get that dish and be like, yeah, it's eggs. I don't get your point.
I think that's the trickiest part of a critic is to have that complete objectivity, where I know there's so many restaurants in Buffalo that the atmosphere creates such a welcoming environment for people that I think they're going into the meal already enjoying the meal before they've had a bite. And I think like one of the trickiest things that we have to do is ignore that. I'll put it out there. We had a pretty subpar meal at Left Bank, and Left Bank is considered to a lot of people to be a favorite restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I think a reason that a lot of people love that
number 2 on Yelp's top restaurants in Buffalo. Number 1 on TripAdvisor.
Exactly. And I think a lot of the reasons why people love those places isn't so much about the food, although maybe they have like the one dish they order every single time, and that's the only thing they ever order. But it's the vibe of that restaurant is fantastic. The look, the design. I mean, it was way ahead of its time. They're eating
from memory. They're eating from I get that. But don't you think that's a different thing though than what Andrew's talking about?
Because I think that also can play with a chef. I mean, I will fully admit that I'm very close friends with several chefs, and I get excited to see what they're trying next. And it's hard for me to set that aside sometimes and to detach myself from being excited to see what Ed's going to do when me and Ed hang out and talk about food all the time. And I have to remember, like, I might be super jazzed up about this, but the people that they don't know Ed, they don't know anybody there. They're not going into it with the same expectations, which maybe could go either way.
Don't you think that's part of our role though, when we're writing a restaurant review, is for them to see what we see and to understand what is actually fascinating or interesting or special about that business and that chef and that the context that comes back again to its historical place in the scene and in the context of the place you're eating at.
Maybe when you're writing features about the chef's life and their establishment and what they've made and that they've built in the community, but I don't think that's I don't think you want to see that in restaurant reviews. You don't want to be in a position in restaurant reviews you're explaining why this dish should have been awesomer, but this chef was just having a bad day today, who I know.
True, yeah.
See, I think that's an extreme scenario. I mean, I think that, like the quotes that I read earlier, I do think that a review is the ideal place to paint context, because I think that it's important to understand why 1,000 people go to this one Greek diner rather than to the other 7 Greek diners that were within 6 miles of it, and some of it's the food and some of it's a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
Which has to do with how awesome the woman who is the grandma who stands at the host station and welcomes everyone, and how it has a neighborhood vibe, and how, et cetera. I think there is a context, or the fact that this guy, is let's say the only Greek diner that doesn't use oregano and uses something else instead. You know what I mean? Like, there's that context, that story to me is what makes people want to go to a restaurant or decide if they're willing to trade partial experience in exchange for food quality.
I also think that there is some degree of a review that should be educational, I guess. Maybe for the Buffalo...
I feel that
way. For
the
Buffalo community, where we have a lot of great things going on, but there's still a vast majority of eaters who aren't up to date as everyone else and would like to know why something is delicious because it's prepared this way, and you only have that information if you really know what's going on,
or how to even understand. I mean, another question that one of the chefs suggested that I ask you is sort of, which we covered in that podcast we did with Steve and Ed right at the beginning of our podcast series, is sort of like, Andrew, what do you take of the downtown restaurant boom? Do you think there's too many restaurants opening that could possibly ever survive? And what is it going to take to bring, especially since you eat out at a lot of suburban restaurants and live in the suburbs, what is it going to take to bring suburban suburban diners downtown to have experiences at places that are a little less traditional than your average dinosaur barbecue meal, like that are something like Proper or Ocean or Black Sheep or, Teuton.
What will it take? I'm not really sure. I mean, that's not my problem. I don't feel like
I don't think it's your problem. I'm just asking you as a person who dines in the suburbs and lives in the suburbs and thinks about food and knows what's happening down here.
Well, they got to read more of my articles, I guess, because I'm one of the things I'm trying to lay out. One of the broad themes I'm trying to lay out for people, and I think I did that in my year-end wrap-up, 10 restaurants of 2014. Find it at buffalonews.com. Is that there are so many new reasons to break out of your rut, and for a lot of people who have been trained over a lot of years, these are people who live in the first-ring suburbs. They do not go downtown Buffalo to eat. I think they need to get over themselves, and I'm trying to give them my best information about some very good reasons to get over themselves, come downtown, and get something to eat. Because if you don't, you're missing out.
Yeah,
that's been a theme of mine. You know, and that's what I feel I can do. That hesitance is very real. There's vast swaths of people who I hear from either via email or they call me up, and one of the things they want to know is there a parking lot?
Yes.
Is there a parking lot? And whatever else it stands for the fact that it is considered a substantial barrier to people in the suburbs to come downtown and dine if they have to parallel park.
Yes.
Or, God forbid, pay for parking.
Right.
Yeah, all of my family lives in the suburbs. Yes, I can attest.
So that's the advantages that the suburban places with nice parking have, that they get those people.
Okay, I'm just going to be quiet for just 1 second here because I really have to hold my tongue.
Well, you were asking before about anonymity, and we never really got there.
It's true.
I just wanted to say that I'm not really anonymous. I just try to make it not too easy to remember my face if you run into me. I'm an ugly enough guy that if you've seen me one time, I'm seared on your retinas. There's no way around that. But I feel like if I walk into a place and they know who I am, basically all I've done then is given them a chance to show me the best possible restaurant they can be.
But you're not making reservations under your name, so you're not giving people time to
No,
prepare
I never make
and know that you're
reservations
coming
under
in.
my
I just
own
want to
name.
clarify that for people who don't know.
My wife makes fun of me, and maybe she's right. She calls it your super spy routine that you do. So there's going to be a reservation under somebody else's name. We're walking in, never going to draw attention to myself other than the fact that, I order more food than most people, and there's no way around that. So, But other than that, basically, if I walk into a place and I'm recognized, it's almost like a load off of my shoulders, because it's like, you know what? The advantage that you're looking for is to not be treated differently. You'd love to be able to portray for your reader what an average dining experience was like.
Sure.
And the fact and the trying to be anonymous or unrecognized or whatever you want to put it is only about trying to give your reader the best information you're going to be able to give them. Because once I am recognized, things start happening differently.
Yes.
Yeah.
The chef shows up at your table side. A train of people come by to see if everything is fine.
Yeah, no, Donnie Burtless and I mean, we definitely have that experience ourselves.
We've experienced that.
You get
not every time.
Remember the first time we went out for drinks?
You get crumbed between dishes, which is really more of an.
You're supposed to get crumbed between dishes at the right restaurant.
Well, I'm just telling you, if the rest of the people in the room aren't being crumbed between dishes, then you have just proven that you don't care about those people, but you care about somebody who's named well, which is not flattering.
Have you ever thought doing
it's not flattering. It's embarrassing, actually.
And have you ever thought about doing the Pete Wells thing, where you have the...
Which Pete
Wells? I believe it was Pete Wells. He went to a restaurant, and he had this immaculate service, but the restaurant didn't know that he had his friend at the other table, and he was actually reviewing the restaurant.
That's an old move. That's actually an ancient move that's been around for 40 years or something.
I think that would be fascinating. I don't really have the facilities.
Somebody famously reviewed Le Cirque that way a long time ago.
It was
Ruth Rachel.
She wore a costume or something.
But she also...
She went once unrecognized and then went back with the publisher. and wrote about the contrast between the two meals.
Right,
Terrific-
but
terrific piece.
there was another, and I'll find it or whatever. I'm sure 5 seconds after we finish this. But there was another critic who did the same thing, where they went in being themselves and knowing they'd be recognized, and had a friend sit 4 tables away.
Pete Wells, I think it was, who did that.
Really? I thought there was somebody who predated him.
Sam
'cause he's-
Sifton?
Maybe.
Anyways, it's a great idea if you can pull it off. Basically, I'm only supposed to be working on my restaurant review in the corner of my bailiwick at the Buffalo News of what I'm supposed to be doing. But here I am talking about it again because it's the only part of my job anybody cares about.
I
And
think
you know
Andrew
what?
wants us to take him out for drinks. He sounds sad.
Yeah.
It's a terrific job. Honestly, I mean, I feel like it's a lot of responsibility. I take that responsibility seriously. And even though I'm serving the readers, my heart goes out to the people who make my job possible by making the restaurants of Buffalo, New York, open and available and thriving the way they are. It's never been a more interesting time to write about Buffalo restaurants. That is for
that's
sure.
for sure.
It's the truth.
And if anybody's listening out here, let me just remind you that all the new places opening, the flip side of that is that some places are going to be dying because there's only so many places out there. So if there's the old favorite that you haven't been to in a while, maybe you should just go out there because you do not know how long they have. So enjoy what you have while it's there.
I mean,
Well, and Donnie and I always say the exact opposite, which is that if you have a new favorite, don't go eat at all the other favorites all the time. You need to support the new guy because he's going to have the harder time in this current climate.
we'd like to think that these new exciting restaurants are going to push out the boring old ones, but
Or the mediocre.
yeah, but I think that there's a lot of people who just go to restaurants because it's comfortable.
Well, and there's a huge number of people who go to the hottest new restaurant.
Yeah.
And then, that's all they do.
The
They'll
early
never go
adopters.
back. Right,
Yeah.
right. So we're sort of running short on time, but it's really important to me that we talk about Yelp. Or crowdsourced reviews. I use Yelp because it's the most obvious and most popular option.
Yeah.
I did invite Alex from the local Yelp organization to be here, and he was unable to be here on both dates that I tried to work out. So I don't want it to seem as if we're just going to sit here and bash on Yelp without having tried to allow them to at least speak for themselves. Anthony Bourdain said famously that Yelp has been the death of him, and speaking for his career or whatever. And I wonder, I think there are times when crowdsourced reviews are great and times when they're highly unreliable, and we could talk about that a little bit if you want. But I'm wondering, Andrew, sort of if you have a general take on crowdsourced reviews.
I love Yelp reviews.
Okay, tell me all about it.
Well, every time before I go to a place to write about it, anytime I go to a place for the first time, even if I'm not writing about it, I read everything I possibly can about the restaurant. Every single stick. That includes Yelp reviews.
God bless you.
And every other place that has reviews. I look for individual bloggers who have done writing about it. Anything I possibly can. I search the newspaper archives to see if we've done it, or any other newspaper has done something. Because I want to know everything I can walking in. Now, I'm sort of a different animal than most people. I guess most people read Yelp reviews and decide, is this a place I want to go to?
Right.
Well, they're in a little bit of a pickle there because you can't tell until you get a sense for individual Yelp reviewers just who broke up with their girlfriend and the result was a Yelp review, or who got told they couldn't have a comped basket of French fries and the result was a bad Yelp review. You can't really tell, but I'm glad. I see Yelp reviews as a sign that dining is important to people, and to me that says that the overall enterprise I'm involved in is important to people. There are Yelp reviewers who whenever I see their name, I'm like, ooh, I want to see what they have to say.
I agree with that
because I have recognized them by now. And there's a couple of people who, I'm feeling if I ever figure it out, I'm going to take them out to dinner one day and do a double review action. Because I think some of them have really interesting points of view, and some of them, most importantly, their opinions about certain restaurants and dishes at those restaurants correlate highly with my own. And when I see that, I'm like, "Oh, that person's smart and handsome too." So I read Yelp reviews a lot. Now, is it clear that occasionally somebody is using Yelp reviews for reasons it was not intended? That is, to hurt, to punish, to
Have a vendetta.
undermine.
Or as false people. They're like the restaurant themselves.
Oh, the shills. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sure. But, it's the internet. So you got to, if you're reading information on the internet and making life decisions based on that, and you haven't figured out how to filter out some of the BS, I feel sorry for you.
I think it's really challenging because, as you mentioned, Yelp reviews, and it's been said by many people smarter than I am, are typically about the Yelp reviewer more than they are about the actual restaurant. They're typically from the point of view of somebody who you don't necessarily know their credibility or their background or what they've experienced, right? And that the idea is that with a restaurant critic, they've clearly been qualified. They're qualified to do their job, and so you can defer to a restaurant critic's review, knowing that they have some level of dining and background that you could rely on. I myself have found that in the increasing level of advertorial writing that's happening in this world, which for people who are not journalists, that means pieces that are directly or indirectly paid for. They're either written as a favor to an existing advertiser or paid for by the advertiser. That when I travel now, like when I went to Montreal 2 years ago or whatever, I had a hit list of places that are quite famous that I obviously wanted to eat at, but I also wanted to find some little corner divey spots, and I couldn't necessarily find enough reviews from professional critics that I could be assured in my own heart of hearts were genuine reviews and not in some way advertorial content. And so I ended up relying more heavily on reading lots and lots of Yelp reviews and lots of Urban Spoon reviews.
How'd that work out for you?
It was hit and miss. I had one massive hit that is the most memorable moment that I had in Montreal, and I had a couple of pretty lame experiences with places that had been fallen into the top 5 restaurants in Montreal category, that were not rated based on that were like rated based on the number of dollar signs, right? So like if I'm sure I already had plenty of $4 restaurants that I wanted to go to, I needed to find some $1 and $2 restaurants, and those were not reliable and impossible to really sort of cross-check with valid information online. And I think, when I'm here in town, honestly, I will use Yelp for research purposes for work, but I would never use Yelp as a diner. Because I find that there's a certain type of person who uses Yelp for the most part, and that certain type of person is not somebody who I typically agree with. That's my experience.
If Christa and Donnie needs to use Yelp reviews to figure out where she wants to have dinner, we are all screwed.
Well, true. I suppose that's true. But if you look at where I was several years ago in my career, there are certainly, especially when you're talking about Clarence or Youngstown or Olcott or something like that. If I want to be including a larger region, I have to do some levels of research.
No,
but I find, like I said, that Yelpers are sort of the person who wants to publish reviews with their likely somewhat real name on it.
Yeah.
A lot is a certain type of person, and I seem to not be able to identify with the way they eat and what they like to eat.
I think in different cities, Yelp can be a tool that maybe isn't as effective in Buffalo because, we have a growing Yelp scene, but I think it's kind of what Andrew was saying. If you can do the work and sift through the reviews that are clearly crap, or somebody who's like, this restaurant was cold, 1 star, like that kind of stuff, like if you can manually figure out the people who seem like they know what they're talking about, I think it can be useful. But I think in most cities, if I've ever used it in like New York City or Chicago, very rarely, but I'm going off of the general crowd. I'm not going off of individual reviews. If this place has like 1,200 reviews and it's a 4-star place, like I'll feel more confident about it than a place that has 5 stars but has like 30 reviews.
Sure.
And I think that's when you can really use it. It's hard for me to really critique the skills or the knowledge base that a lot of people have because I had to build that from the ground up.
Sure.
And so, a lot of these people probably are in the same position I was where they're getting a better sense of food and eating. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's kind of like, it's like chicken wings. Like everyone in Buffalo thinks that their one place they grew up with has the best chicken wings, and so they will write a review on Yelp saying like, "This is the best place you've ever been." But a lot of those experiences are just based on growing up in circumstances and not encapsulating a broader sense.
Of course.
And I think that's a tricky thing with Yelp, where you can't taste nostalgia. So like, if you're writing a 5-piece or 5-star review saying this is the best place ever, like, it's so much work to just like figure out if that person really knows what they're talking about or not.
I think for anybody who's interested, when I was doing the very minor amount of research I did to be able to do this today, statistician Nate Silver has this website called 538. Andrew, did you read this article that he wrote that is basically decided to compare the methods for highbrow and lowbrow judging? So he compared Yelp users with Michelin star users. It's a fascinating read. So if anybody, it's 538 spelled out.
Yeah, it's a great
538. And there's some really great information on there. But at the end of the day, what he figured out is that with any kind of review, it's easy to identify the outliers, the extraordinary restaurants, the terrible restaurants, but that distinguishing the very good restaurants from the average restaurants is really, really challenging. And that there's really no substitute for eating in them yourself. And I would say that we probably all find that to be the case. And we certainly have far more good restaurants than we do have terrible or fantastic in this community, I think.
I agree with that.
I think anybody who wants to try for my job as a restaurant reviewer at the Buffalo News should be forced to write reviews sufficiently differentiating one place for another of 10 mid-level Italian red sauce joints in Western New York.
You're right.
That's a certain level of hell for some people.
It's a certain level of hell for me, for certain.
Make it abundantly clear from the text without actually naming the restaurants, like how they differentiate from each other. You're welcome to it.
I think that sounds like a fantastic idea, actually. And I just kind of want to close up our conversation today, which I know we could really go on for hours.
Let's just do another hour.
Frank Bruni, famous Frank Bruni, said that, the interesting thing that happens when he's talking about how often you go back and review a restaurant is that when you review a restaurant or visit a restaurant once or twice, that what you ultimately have is just a transaction, that what you have with a restaurant that you visit over and over again is a relationship. Quote, the fashionable script for today's food maven doesn't encourage that sort of bonding, especially not in a city with ambition and inexhaustible variety. Yeah, reflection, Andrew.
I cannot agree with that position. Again, he's in Manhattan and I'm in Buffalo, New York. But I feel like what diners want is a restaurant that they can fall in love with, that they can build a relationship with, that they can keep, that they can make their regular place. Don't we all want our regular place, a place where we walk in and we know we can get our really satisfying meal from people who we like being around for a reasonable price?
Yes, and that's why I was arguing with you earlier when we were talking about being in love with a restaurant and whether or not that should actually enter into any kind of like review scenario. But I'm wondering if you actually have any restaurants that you're actually in love with that you would be willing to disclose with us. That's what I was trying to get to.
That I'm in love with. Wow.
That are your jam.
Put me on the spot.
I know, but
All right.
somebody's got to.
Peking quick one.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Done.
That is,
even when they don't have the heater turned on?
It's close to my house.
Even when you have to wear a parka?
All my kids have their favorite dishes. I don't mind getting up and having to get my own water.
Nice.
The woman knows by now, the woman who owns it, whose name escapes me, knows by now that when she sees me, she should point out the things they've got on their specials board that are particularly good, even if most people who look like me wouldn't be ordering them.
Sure.
She's turned me on to a couple things there. I was just like, I want to hug you, lady whose name I cannot remember.
That is in love for Andrew. Yeah, volunteering hugs.
I mean, and you get fed at $7 and $8 dishes that are just like alive and with flavor and satisfying, and that's, to me, that's about as close as love is going to get.
You got anything else for me?
I can tell you, people have been surprised when they ask for where's my vegetarian or lighter meal go to. It's Montequiche and More.
Yeah, I know you love that place.
I go in there, and the place is not necessarily nice. It's a little bit dingy. I'll use that word. But the food is terrific. I go in there, I get hummus, baba ganoush, falafel. Make sure and ask the guy for a plate of red chili and pickles, which he's happy to bring you along the side to sort of doctor up all the other stuff. Get a spinach pie, get the za'atar manikish, get the cheese manikish, which are like fresh little pizzas that they make. And I can be so happy, and I don't need meat. That's sometimes where I go, and I'm not when I'm not on professional dining, which is most of the time.
Clock.
And the third one, which I have to mention, which should be clear and is not going to be a surprise to anybody who's ever read my work in the Buffalo News, is Sun. Mm-hmm. When I told my wife on our anniversary, and we weren't professional eating, we can go any place you want, sweetheart. She said, we should go to Sun. And I was like, yeah, we should go to Sun. You're right. And we went there, and it was... I have not loved every single thing that he's done in there either.
Yeah,
but
Kevin and his wife are great. And their restaurant's fantastic.
Well, and he's working on making that place better and better.
All the time.
He just didn't get to a point where he could make money and like that's good enough. He keeps pushing it. And you know what? Kevin Lynn reads his Yelp reviews.
Yes, he does.
He changed a number of things because he got feedback from people that it was taking too long to get food in his restaurant and that some of it wasn't coming out up to snuff. And he tore out his kitchen and retrained staff or got different ones or something. I mean, those are three places where
You're happy?
that really resonate with me.
So it comes as no surprise to me, but it might come surprise to our listeners that you've named all ethnic, immigrant-owned restaurants. And I know that that's your jam. I've known that was your jam before you even started doing restaurant reviews because we've had this conversation 100 times.
I like white people, too.
Well, is there any place that makes it into your love list that's more
Absolutely.
traditional?
Let's talk about Italian food. Santacero's, Ditando's. I have eaten so many meals at Ditando's. Largely as a function of how close they are.
Yeah, they're down the street from the
my
news office.
But mostly because I've never had a bad meal in there. And I have eaten a lot of meals. Now I'm going in there for lunchy, sandwich, and then sometimes you just need to be parmed. So I go into Tondo's.
I never need to be parmed.
And I get parmed. I get my
I
parm
can
on.
assure you that.
Why are those shirts not available?
I'm a Buffalonian. There is no
Might
shame
need a
in
shirt.
that. When I eat chicken wings, I usually end up at Duff's. But I'll tell you what, if the 911 Tavern was around the corner from my house, that's
right.
where I would have been.
Right.
So
Okay.
Jesus, people think I don't love white people food.
It's been said.
It's been said here.
Well, that's fine. That's cool. I figure, you know what?
And it's
I
not
don't
fair to
feel
call
like
it white people food because that's really not fair, I have to say.
I don't feel like the people of Western New York, by and large, need primarily, among all their information, the restaurant information needs, I don't think they primarily are looking for a place to hear about, hey, do you know any place that makes chicken parm? Or, hey, do you know any place that makes a fish fry? Because I could really go for a fish fry. People who love that stuff have their loves and have their favorites. I write about that stuff. I review that stuff. But, I don't feel like it's where I'm really breaking, new ground in terms of like expanding people's minds a little bit about what is available right now on the ground in Western New York.
Okay. All right. I guess that's it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for being here with us today and for being very honest and genuine about sometimes uncomfortable and awkward situations or questions. I know, that your ears must burn a lot because a lot of people want to talk about what's happening in the restaurant review column, what's happening with the editorial at the Buffalo News.
Well, people are welcome to call me and talk to me or email me at agalarneau@buffnews.com if they want. It's an ongoing conversation. And I hope I don't give the impression that I feel like I'm some sort of king on a hill who's like waving his sword at the crowd and telling them to do stuff. I'm just trying to carry out my function in the best way I can, and that changes as I learn more and I grow myself. So,
well, I think that it will be very interesting. I think a lot of people don't really know you, and this is another good way for people to maybe understand a little bit more about how you think and what you're up to.
Well, let's hope so. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it.